Britt, Mary, they'll probably come. They're probably just late. Yep. That's Purvis' wife.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know she and Britt, they very much kind of protect
The white lady right here.
don't anymore. I'm more clinical about it. I don't really have a vested interest in the outcome.
Yeah, I don't know her. I mean, I know all the rest of them. Yeah, I've met her.
All right, we have the general agenda up. All right, I'd like to. Does this work?
Test.
All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to today's board workshop on school security. And I have a few administrative notes that I wanted to go over beforehand. First off, I'd like to welcome all the law enforcement professionals. Thank you very much. Obviously, school security is at the forefront of all of our thoughts. And the fact that we look around and we have the sheriff and chiefs here shows that obviously it's just as important to you. And the goal today, there's not going to be any action, just so you understand. I know you don't probably watch us on AOC or come to our meetings all that often, but we're not taking any action today. This is basically an opportunity for you guys to educate us on where we are today, have an open discussion amongst ourselves on where we think we need to go, things that we think we can do to improve school security, and an opportunity for us as a board to be educated on all those things. It is a workshop, so there's mics in front of you. If you have something you want to say, obviously that's why you're here. We hope that you would share it with us. If we start typically the board president recognizes the next speaker. This type of an environment, we have a little more flexibility, and we can just kind of speak freely. If we start talking over each other, it's kind of just courteous to raise your hand, and then if we get to that point, I can certainly recognize who the next speaker is going to be. So we're going to skip the first item. It's indemnification and insurance because it's a little bit more lawyer talk, and save that to the end because I really want to get to the meat of where we are today. So the first item that we'll talk about is 1.3. What is an SSO? And I'm asking Mr. Craig, and this is for, again, a lot of this may be academic to the officers in the room, but some of this may be new to some of our board members or some of the audience that's watching on TV or people in the audience. So the first thing we'd like to start with, Mr. Craig, is kind of the definition of what an SSO is.
Thank you, Mr. Knezek. So an SSO, and I get this question fairly often. An SSO, we're talking school safety officer, is an employee of the Lafayette Parish school system. And so the district pays his salary, his retirement, his group health, his Medicare. That's an employee. I'm sorry. You can't hear me? Not well. You got it, Mark? I'm sorry. So an SSO, school safety officer, is an employee of the Lafayette Parish school system, and the district is responsible for the salary, retirement, insurance, Medicare, and we pay that salary. And so if you look at it from that perspective, the SSO answers to the building administrator, which is typically the principal and his administrative staff. An SSO might be a commissioned officer, and so when I say that, I'm making that synonymous with carrying a weapon while he's on his job. But typically they're not commissioned officers, and SSOs do not carry a weapon on campus. From a practical standpoint, the big difference is an SSO takes care of the administrative issues, the administrative types of disciplines that occurred on the school campus, whereas an SRO takes care of the criminal issues that might arise on a campus. So they serve distinct positions, a distinct role. I know several of my principals have told me over the years they truly value those SSOs. They can't do discipline, but they can assist with lunchtime supervision. They can assist with a student that's not necessarily cooperating with a teacher. They can go retrieve a student from class. Students that are skipping, students that are hiding, trying to leave campus without permission. They take care of the administrative types of discipline-related issues that need to be brought to the school principal or the assistant principal. And then the SROs typically take on those activities related to anything that might be criminal in nature or part of, say, a school safety issue.
Okay, can you speak to the range of cost to LPSS?
So because we're paying salary, retirement, and group health, I think that is an attachment to your agenda item. If you would take on an SSO without any experience, you're talking roughly $55,000 a year. An individual that would qualify for 15 years of experience, and that's typically our average calculation. You're looking at $63,000 a year, and then somebody that's way up on the pay scale would be towards $71,000 a year, and those costs or those dollar amounts include salary, retirement, insurance, and Medicare. So on our end, they in relation to some of our SRO contracts, it's a higher dollar amount, and that's because of the extra benefits and retirement that we pay for.
Right. The reason I brought this up, board members, is that I anticipate that this conversation is going to the point where we're going to decide whether or not to fund more SROs, more police officers in the schools. And when we get to that point, we are going to have to make budgetary decisions on where that money is going to come from. I mean, we all know our budget situation. So when we're considering safety, and I'm not saying one way is the right way or the wrong way, but when we're considering safety, and we're paying, whether it's $65,000 or $72,000 for a person for security, who then is unarmed, who's also an LPSS employee, and we weigh that with the option of hiring a commissioned officer that is armed, that is part of the SRO program, I think those are going to be tough decisions that we have to make. And no one, and I'm certainly not saying that we don't need SOs. We need a lot of things. We need more teachers. We need a lot of things. But when we have to make the tough decision regarding the budget and where we're going to get an extra few $1 million to put police officers in schools, that's one of the reasons I brought this up, is so that we could be aware of. We have 8, as far as I understand it, Mr. Craig. We have 8 current SSOs, and they cost us in a range comparable to, but more than, what we currently pay for SRO protection. So that was that. Does anybody have any questions on the board or in the public or any of the officers present regarding SSOs? All right. So then the other acronym, SRO, is the next thing, 1.4. What is an SRO? I think it's probably best that we start hearing from you guys on what the definition of an SRO is. I pulled the definition off the National Association of School Resource Officers. I don't have it in front of me, I don't think. But I can tell you it says there are 3 things. One, they're a commissioned officer. They're a commissioned police officer, a trained police officer. In Louisiana, I believe we consider those post-certified officers. 2, they're a mentor. And I wish I could think of 3 or had it in front of me. But obviously they're important, and that's why we're here today. So from your perspective, I think that it's important that we hear why you think it's important, and the public hears why you think it's important, or if you don't think it's important that we have police officers in our schools. And just to recap, we don't have them in all our schools. So if we need them in all our schools, now's the time to tell us. Now's the time to convince us that we need SROs in all the schools. So, anybody want to start? Sheriff? Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll start off the discussion. Can everybody hear me?
A little closer, I think.
Okay.
Maybe not on.
I'll leave it because it switches. Let me try it. Yeah,
There you go, Sheriff.
seems like it did. Okay, that's better. All right. So, there's a couple of questions that come to mind when we talk about having police in schools. And I would venture to say that everyone at this table up front believes that we should have post-certified armed security protecting our children. And when I think about it as a parent, I have an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old. They go to ESA. They're not in schools that have full-time security. And I got into ESA's business about their lower school back when they had first built it, and told them how inadequate their security was. And they not do just to what I said, I'm sure, but they tightened it up. Elementary schools have been a target. We see that historically. Middle schools have been a target, and high schools have been a target, and are probably more likely to have violence at them because of the age of the children there. We can look at arming teachers, and I say that if a teacher wants to be armed, they can be a reservist and be fully post-certified, and then they would be qualified to carry a gun, same as if one of us wanted to teach part-time. We would have to get a teaching certificate, I presume, and have some kind of credentials and training in order to teach children. So you're left with, how do we best spend our money? And I unequivocally urge the board to find a way to put armed protection in every school. The alternative, as I guess as macabre as this is going to sound, is you're looking at a hallway with pools of blood and book sacks and bodies, because that's what other communities have had to face. We can't prevent violence, but we can displace violence. We can make people who are going to commit violence choose to do it somewhere else. That's the best we can do as long as there's human beings populating this earth. I would rather shoot it out with somebody who wants to do harm to people on the street, in the parking lot of the mall, somewhere else, anywhere else besides a school. And what we've seen when we've looked at mass shootings is that these shooters are essentially, they're cowards. They oftentimes kill themselves before the police catch up to them. So they'll kill innocent, defenseless people for as long as they can, and then they'll end their own lives. They don't want to face the consequences of what they did. The Parkland shooter is a notable exception in that he was captured alive. The Orlando nightclub shooter being a particular example that I like to use. I've heard the briefing from the city police and from the sheriff, and they have video of him going from club to club. Contrary to popular myth, he didn't go to a gay club to kill gay people. He went to the first club that he found where there was not a marked police unit outside. There was a detective working security there in an unmarked car that was parked way in the back of the parking lot where he wasn't effective and he wasn't a deterrent. But he can be seen on video pausing and looking and moving on to another softer target. So what we're really talking about here is making our schools a hard target, an undesirable place to commit violence. And I don't see any other effective way to do it that I can stand behind besides putting trained police officers at these schools. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's not easy to find an SRO. You can't just put any post-certified person around kids. It takes specialized training, and then it takes intensive supervision in order to minimize the risks that are present with that. Everybody on this board has been served, I'm sure, with lawsuits stemming from acts of police officers at schools as well. So I think I'll close my comments with that and pass the mic.
How you doing? I'm Chief
Yes, sir.
Reginald Thomas. Since 2007, we started our SRO program in the city of Lafayette. We had the DARE program before that, and then we went to the SRO program. The DARE program, I believe we maybe had 4 DARE officers at that time. We have a total of 12 SRO officers. Each officer, before they go to a school, has to be employed with us at least 2 to 4 years before you're even able to interview to go to that school. We only put people in the school that shows that they can handle kids and has been doing a good job with kids. We give each person a marked unit. That unit is through the city. That unit is parked in front of the high schools and in front of the schools where they're at. During summertime, we send them to different summer camps, and they have different programs that they also do. Our SROs have 2 supervisors. Those supervisors are provided by the city also. It's 2 sergeants. These 2 guys has been with the SRO since its begin. One of them was a DARE officer. So we have so much experience in our SRO. It's a program that we're very proud of. It's a program that our officers are very well trained in. So for us, SROs, it also give us a lot of information in reference to juveniles, problems we might have later on. They know everybody. A lot of guys from SRO become detectives because being in the school system, they know everyone. So it is unbelievable what they give to our police department. It's something that we work hard to have our SROs go to all the training that they need to go to, start new programs. It's something that we definitely want to keep. We think that it adds to the school tremendously. We also do a lot of active shooter training. That's training that shows officers how to go in if somebody's shooting inside of the school. We have our SRO officers trained with our SWAT team. When the SWAT team is doing training at the schools, the SRO officers are there. So I'm very comfortable that my SROs know what to do, know how to do it, and right now I think they're doing an excellent job.
Chief?
If you don't mind. I'd like to kind of thank you again for putting this on and allowing us to participate as chiefs and sheriff to provide the best safety, provide the safety that we can to all of our kids and our students. Like Reggie said, in 2007 is when the Lafayette Parish School Board and all the local law enforcement agencies that you're looking at went full-time school resource officers. But for about 5 years prior to that, we were part-time, and the school board was paying off-duty officers to come in until we saw where it was needed, where we could get full-time officers in. The funding was available. We have the mutual aid agreements that we came up with the splitting of the cost and the funding on both parts. But one of the things, like Reggie mentioned, our patrol officers, when we hire someone, we put them in patrol. And they learn the streets, they learn the families, they learn the needs of the people of our communities. And I'm talking about in each community that you see in front of you here today. So when we select a school resource officer, it's someone that's very qualified, very experienced, but very knowledgeable about our community. And I'm looking at the First Lady of the City of Scott sitting right here, and she's shaking her head yes. You know, we choose our SROs to know. They know what the families, they know where our problems are at, they know who's the needy kids, the needy families, or what it is. And where it comes to that, it's not just a job, it's a personal issue. They take pride. Our SROs take pride in the jobs that they do in our schools, all the way to the point of when we had a situation at one of our schools not long ago where there was some security that was needed or requested for, and our SROs are wanting to do it for free. The time, the endless hours that our SROs put into working with kids and working with the staff. But where it comes into play, and I'm looking at across the table right here, is that the amount of time over the last 10 years that we've been full-time school resource officers and our programs have been implemented in the system is the time and efforts that's put in by the departments. Some of the things that you're looking at and looking at the SSOs, I think they're very valuable to certain degrees in the middle person between the SRO and the administrator. But the things that you're not paying for. And I want to thank the administrators that are in the audience tonight for coming out and showing their support as well. And Eric, I'd appreciate if you'd allow some of them to speak as well on behalf of the SROs that work for them, and hear straight from them what's going on as well. But it's the direct connection. I know every administrator that's in this room right now has a phone number for their respective chief or their respective SRO or whoever they need if they need something on that campus, and vice versa. If we have an alarm that goes off in the middle of the night, our patrol officers know the administrators. You know, is that close bond that we face, the things that we do, the extra stuff that we go, the active shooters. Acadiana High School was one of the first schools in Lafayette Parish that we did actual simulation active shooter drills, and we've done it there, and we've done it at Scott Middle School as well, where we've gone in and done teacher in-service trainings and working with the teachers to let them see. And the part that we didn't realize was also smell what an active shooter is going to entail because of the fact of the plume that was hanging from the gunpowder from after shooting these firearms that was hanging in the ceilings that they were able to smell, and put some reality checks into what's going on for us and for them. So there's a lot of things that were taking place, but the pride that goes into the amount of hours that's worked, and the things that are taking place. But the part that really goes is replacing school resource officers. Unfortunately, when we were in school, was police officers were just there for show and tell. You know, unfortunately, it's come to the date where not only we've had to add police officers to every school, and I agree with the sheriff on this. It's time that we need to move forward to looking at our elementary schools, and we're seeing the impact on that as well. But unfortunately, we had to add 2 SROs to our high schools this year, and I thank you for doing that because that was much needed across the parish for the safety of our kids. So I challenge this committee to really look at what we have implemented. We have come a long way over the last 10 years in providing the safety for our students and our teachers and our communities. But I challenge this committee, which is all of us here, to provide better safety and better training and better knowledge to move forward on that part of it. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else on this subject?
Thank you, Eric,
Yes, sir.
and board members and administrators. We are all here for the same purpose. We want to make sure everybody understands that. Nobody's here against anyone else or any project that you're looking to do. We want to show you that we are united. We want to show you that we do stand together, including the sheriff. He has some SROs in the parish schools that aren't incorporated, so he is just as invested as we are in those schools as we are in our local communities. I think I can speak for my city government, my council and mayor when I say this, that when the SRO program became effective or available, I only have a middle school, obviously, but that was, our council was adamant and wanted a local Broussard officer in that school. They wanted that touch with our agency and that school administration, those students in that school. Yeah, through redistricting and things, maybe not 100% or probably not 100% of those students are Broussard citizens, but a majority of them are. So we know those kids, whether it's from the patrol officer's aspect of dealing with them or seeing them on the street, whether it's during the summer playing ball or in the grocery store somewhere with their parents. We see those kids. We also see them through our SRO in the school, and that link is vital. We all feel that the intelligence that SRO brings into the school and out of the school back into the police department for anything that may stem from the school into the community and vice versa, anything that may have occurred in the community outside of school hours that can go back into the school. And our principal, Mr. Mouton, is here, and I'm sure you're very well aware of his accomplishments at Broussard Middle School, and he has received several awards for what he has done at our school. And we are very grateful to have that administrator there supporting us, there for us, and vice versa. We are there for him no matter what time of the day or night it is, whether it's him taking a trip to DC and we need to watch his vehicles that are in the parking lot, or being there day to day to handle the day-to-day activities of the school. So I just wanted to make sure that y'all understood that the link between the SRO is not just a commissioned police officer. Yes, that is a qualification, but the link between that officer and the local agency is vital.
Board, thank you again for allowing us to be here. I just want to expound a little bit on what Chief Deku just said about you know, your local SROs. I had one of my SROs call me about 8:15 one night and said, Chief, I just want to let you know I'm on my way to one of our students' home. And I said, okay, is this something that we can handle on duty? She said, no, I've been requested to go. The student wants to speak, especially with me. And it's one of the kids that I see at school often, and she confides in me when her day is just not going right. And this child was having one of those days, and she didn't want to speak to her friends. She didn't want to speak to anybody else. She wanted to speak to her SRO. So that tells me right there what kind of connection that the SROs have with these children on a daily basis. It's not just you know, hey, Mr. Policeman, or hey, how you doing at school? These kids really bond with these school resource officers, and they feel like they have somebody they can go to. You know, a lot of kids these days, a lot of troubled kids, they need that. They need to know a police officer that they can go to. A little bit more what Chief Deku said about the intel. The majority of our crimes that are solved, I know in Karen Crow, come from intel from our high school. Those kids come to the SRO and they tell them, we follow those leads and we eventually make those arrests on these burglaries, whether it be any kind of stabbing or shooting or anything like that. That's where our intel comes from, because these kids want to do the right thing and they need somebody to talk to, and they can't go and tell their friends this because they're going to get called out on it. So they have to have that school resource officer to go to. You know, if we look back since the SROs have started, I think we've come a tremendous way. We really have. I know at the beginning of this school year, we had some problems with fights at our high school. But I have to say that with the administration at our high school and the SROs, we've come from 2 to 3 fights a day down to maybe 1 fight a week. And that's leaps and bounds when you talking about so many kids. So they do play an intricate role. I think it's vital, again, that we do have these SROs at our schools. And I guess I like to look at it as a fine antique car. You know, you spend years and years buffing the paint on this car to make it look perfect, but there may be something wrong with the engine. It's just missing, just a little bit. Are we going to break the whole car down to the frame so we can just fine-tune the engine? Or are we going to go right to it and let's see how we can fine-tune that engine to make it work even better for us? And I think that's what we have here. We have something that's working so great that we just need to expound it, and let's try to put our finger exactly on what we need to do to make it even better. And instead of maybe looking at ways that we can hopefully not take steps backwards, because our children definitely don't deserve that, and we can't afford to let that happen. Thank y'all.
Thank y'all again for everything. I'd like to thank all the administrators from Youngsville came, because there's even some that don't have an SRO in their school that came in support of our department and what we do. But I think when y'all came to the departments for SROs, y'all asked for a commitment for us. We gave that commitment. We even gave more. You heard what it costs for a school security officer for you. We absorb all that. We absorb all the cost of training. When I put my 2, and I've only started putting them in the schools, it was not talking bad about the previous chief. He didn't want it. Well, that was something I wanted because I knew the connection I had with the community. I knew the connection my officers have with the community. So I wanted to be in those schools because of what we give back to our people by putting an SRO in that school. But we absorb all the costs for the training. We absorb all the costs for their benefits. And it saves you money, but it puts a much more qualified person in the schools and much more safer. Even the schools that don't have our SROs, I think everyone here, including the sheriff, we take pride in those schools. So when there's something that's needed, we go and we do it. You don't get a bill from us for it. You don't get charged for it. You don't even hear us asking for a pat on the back. We go because of our commitment, the things that we want to do for our community, and who's better to serve our community than our officers.
And again, just quickly, I would say I don't have a dog in this fight. I have no officers. We have only a elementary school. But with regards to your question, whether or not we need them, Mr. Knezek, I think it's a common sense approach, and it is that they have been targets in the past, and I don't know how more effective you can affect a community, but then to walk into an elementary school and start taking out kids and educators. I think that would have a tremendous terroristic impact on this community. So I think that they do deserve some protection, is my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments, and I'll gladly open it up to anybody in the audience who wants to speak on behalf of the need for SROs. I do think that no, we're not. I don't think we're debating the need, but I just want to offer it up. If anyone wanted to add it. Yeah. 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 Yes, sir.
Good evening. Is it working?
Now, I do want to caution all of you, but we're in budget time, so when we say, hey, we have to cut this in order to pay for that, just remember what you said today. So,
Dr. Aguilar, and Ms. Samick, Mr. Craig, President Knezek, and distinguished board members, I want to thank you very much again for holding this workshop. Also to all the chiefs, Sheriff Garber, for showing up, all the support that we've had here, because this is a very, very important issue. School safety is huge. As I always tell parents, number one, we have to provide a safe environment for all who enter our schools. That is number one priority above anything, because if we can't feel safe, we can't learn. I've been involved with local schools from Rain to Abbeville to Scott, and then also now I'm in Carencro serving as the principal of Carencro Middle School. This is my third year there. I must say that I've always been a believer that it's so crucial to have the community and bringing the community back into the schools. And I felt like that had been missing for so many years. Now we have the communities back in our schools. The rezoning that was done last year has begun to bring that back, that aspect back to where we have local people, local parents involved in the schools once again. And our community is in the schools with our school resource officers. I can speak from personal experience and know that just the one that I have now, which is probably the best I've ever worked with, she is not only dedicated to the students, but she's also dedicated to our entire school. She is a member of our staff. She provides not just security at events, but she also participates with the students. She dances with the students at the dances we have. She engages with them constantly to develop those relationships. She also works at the summer program that we host at our school through the city of Carencro every summer. And there she's able to nurture, develop relationships with students at a very young age, and then nurture those as they continue on through school, whether it be at Carencro Heights, Carencro Middle School, or on into Carencro High School. And I'm here to speak for all of them when I say that they are vital to the relationships that we have with the community. And this is really about being proactive. And as a leader in me school, the number one habit is about being proactive, not being reactive. And in order for us to truly be proactive, we need to have the relationships in the community that provide the information, the connection with all of the members, and they feel comfortable sharing information with the officers, because we have so many pieces of information that come to our schools that allow us to address potential issues, potential problems before they can occur. We're able to provide those interventions because of the intelligence that we receive, the communication we receive from the law enforcement officers that have been out in those communities that day. When we have an issue at the school, it is the Carencro Police Department that is there to support us, regardless of what it may be. So I want to just say that it is important that we continue to think about, as we look at putting resource officers in every school, and I applaud that effort. I applaud that effort. I applaud that ideal, that we continue to think about the community relationships, because we need to continue to bring them into our schools, make them a part of what's going on in our schools, rather than separate them from our schools. It is through those relationships that we will continue to prosper. Our children are the future of our communities, and we need to nurture those relationships so that we continue to have a more positive future. Thank you.
Good evening. David Lejeune, principal of Acadiana High. And of course, I applaud what each and every one of the chiefs said. They all do. They do an outstanding job. And I, of course, am going to brag on the Scott PD because that's who we have. And it's not that, it's of course the day-to-day stuff that they do. They work their butts off each and every day, of course, to build relationships. That's their number one thing. They're not there already as a police officer. They're there to build relationships with the kids, and they do an outstanding job. But it helps that we have Scott PD because they do. They know their families, they know their brothers, they know their sisters, they know their parents, and they're around the streets all the time, even in the summer, dealing with these individuals that come to school each day. So that helps us tremendously. But I want to tell you a little bit about the things they do for us that's not part of their job. Today is an example that we had. We had the little walkout remembrance for Parkland. Well, for the security of the kids, they sent us 8 extra police officers so we could make sure the area around the school was safe. So when we brought those kids out, there was nothing but safety for those kids also. So that helps us. Any pep rally that we have, anytime we take an organization, especially for football, band, out on the road, they provide officers for us that our kids are safe on the roads and at the visiting venues as well as the home venues. And that's the things that we really appreciate. And we get spoiled because I expect it, you know, and I do my best to tell Chief and them all the time, thank you, but they go above and beyond for the school. And a lot of times, all righty, they do it and I don't even ask anymore. They're just there for us, and we appreciate that. I'll drive up on a Sunday afternoon, and I got an officer in the front of the school and an officer in the back of the school. They're doing work, but people see that. We always have people on campus. They see our officers around, and it helps. And like Chief said, if an alarm goes off at midnight, all righty, a lot of times they'll call me. They have keys to the building. They go in and take care of the problem so we don't have to go out. You know, so it's good to have community people there to help us out. They're like an extension of us, and we do appreciate that, Chief. And I know, and I worked for Lafayette Parish also, and with their SROs, and they do the same thing for the Lafayette schools. I was at Como for a while, you know, but I'm really up here to brag on Scott PD and what they do for us each and every day, you know, so I do appreciate that. All right, thank y'all very much.
That's all them Tootsie Rolls he hands out at the football games, huh?
Hi, Principal Catherine Cassidy from Southside High School. You know, the main role, I just had someone in my office today and asked, what is the role of your SRO? It had nothing to do with this meeting tonight. And to sum it up, I just said it's to maintain safety in the school. And when safety is compromised, then they restore safety. That's their main role, right? But it is so much more than that. The building relationships and the vested interest that those guys have in our schools because they live in those communities. They work the ball games. Our officer works ball games at night at the Youngsville Sports Complex. He sees the families there. We had an incident with students' family members who were arrested Our officer came to us the next day and said so-and-so's family member was arrested last night for such and such that happened in the household. Don't you think we treat that student a little differently the next day? Because the student came in very sour the next day, but we knew right offhand what was coming into us. When we do have students that come in, we'll funnel them through the officer's office a lot of time, just so that they can have the opportunity to speak with them. They can look at the address and they can say, I visited that house like 4 times so far. Our police department has visited that house so many times, and so there are some issues there. We treat the kid differently because there are issues that are behind the house. So not only having an SRO, but having a local SRO. I had the luxury of working with Chief Leger and now with Chief Ricky Boudreau, and so that is crucial for me. Another thing that I know that Ms. Lejeune would have mentioned, because we had the luxury of working with Chief on this in Scott, is the cameras. The cameras are in their stations, they're in their units. So personally, with Chief Leger, there were occasions in Scott where they would call us and they would say, you have someone in your commons area who's breaking into your drink machine, all because they were just watching the cameras from their units. So they can see that, but they take a more vested interest because the school that's in their community. So that's another luxury that they have. Like Mr. Lejeune said, they'll put extra officers into the schools, and they know the home lives of the residents, put things in perspective. Again, I'll give an example. Whenever I was coaching at Acadiana High, and the luxury of having the small town police force in your school, I had an athlete. I just preface that by saying that's why we had each other's cell phone numbers. And I was at dinner, and she texted me. She had a very crummy home life, and she had been kicked out, and she was under a tree. God knows where. I didn't even know where. So at the time, it was Caleb Leger was our officer. So I texted him and I said, I can't figure out if she's telling me the truth or not, but can you go check under this tree in this field? So he wasn't even on duty. He got in his car, he drove his car out there. Guess what? She was in the tree. It was freezing cold that night. All she had was a sweatshirt. She had a pair of shorts on. He went and got her because he knew her. He had the relationship with her, put her in the back of his car, and he brought her to a friend's house so that she could have a warm place to stay at night. So that's the kind of relationships that you're able to form with the small town police force in your schools, just with a vested interest in building relationships. So they're definitely valued, and even more so with those relationships that you can build with the local hometown police departments.
Good evening. I'm Cherie Fontenot. I'm principal of Green Tea Linden in Youngsville. And we currently have pre-K to 4th grade at my school. And we do not have an SRO. But we do have lots of babies at our school. And one of the most serious responsibilities that I feel that I have is to keep the people, the kids and the grown-ups at my school safe every day. With the events of recent and also just in the past, it's something that definitely keeps me up at night, because I do realize that we are in many ways a soft target. And while we maybe can't ever meet the definition of a secure school, I do feel like we have a long way to go in making improvements to limit more access on our campuses. I've gotten lots and lots of phone calls from concerned parents, kids crying to come to school after the shootings of recent, and just very traumatized. It's a traumatic experience. And so I feel like that if we could have officers on our school campus, that their presence would definitely have a positive impact, just by giving us a heightened sense of security, and also to help us to promote security on our campuses. I do call on Chief Boudreau all the time. He was in my office yesterday. He helps us out with all kinds of things, from taking children home when their parents have a broken down car. We call, we get their permission, and they bring them home, and they're so thrilled to ride in the back of a police car. Maybe not so much when they're 15 years old, but when they're 7, it's a field trip. They just do countless things for us. I talked to him yesterday. Today, he had a detective in my office this morning getting the address of a family who needed some extra help that we're concerned about. And that's just one example of how Chief Boudreau and his officers have helped us. Their professionalism has just been something that I can only brag about. The relationships that they have with the families in the community. and just the relationship that they have with us. So I'm not the penny counter, I know that, but I just wanted to say, speaking as an elementary school principal, that I do know parents are concerned, and it would definitely help just to have the presence on our campuses. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Venus Swallow, and I'm the principal of Scott Middle. I want to thank all of you for being here. I was at Paul Bro prior and Acadian Middle, and I can tell you the one consistent factor is the link between my resource officers and the patrolmen is vital to myself as an administrator, and here's why. We all know that our kids come to us with social emotional needs that we simply do not have enough resources for. Whenever I get a phone call that there was a domestic dispute at a kid's trailer or their mom has recently relapsed in crack, I can provide groceries from the food pantry I have on my campus. I can at least make sure that they're eating. I can at least make sure that I link them up with a counselor that day, as some of the principals already said. I can get them services immediately, because the reality is they're not going to be taken out of their home because they're living in poverty or their parents are addicts. That is their home. So with the information that my patrolmen give my resource officer, I'm able to extend resources to them. In addition to that, it's all the extras. It's kind of like asking, what's a teacher's job description? We can give you what it says on paper, but the reality of what my resource officer does on a daily basis ranges from giving me that vital information, watching the cameras constantly to make sure that there's not a threat on my campus. First day of school, I don't know how many patrolmen I had there. I didn't ask for any of it, but since I have 2 other elementary schools going through my campus right now, they had all of that covered for me, which was vital as a first-year principal, trust me. And then today, I had 4 additional resource officers on my campus. I never asked for any of this, and I didn't get an invoice for it, and I know you won't either, Dr. Aguilar. So it's all of the extra things that they give us on a regular basis that I simply, painted an entire eagle on my football field during a UL game one day where I was so hot and sweating tailgating, I couldn't believe he was out there doing it. It's those personal things. It's their school. It's their community. And so without that link, I would be very much handicapped as an administrator. So I just want to let you know that it is very important to my school. The relationship is there, and I simply could not do it as effectively or on the level of safety that I have. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is John Mouton. I am the principal at Broussard Middle School. To Dr. Aguilar, the board, and to Chief Deku, thank you, sir, and Lieutenant Galvez as well. I'm fortunate in that at Broussard Middle, we have a resource officer all day, every day. When I arrived at Broussard 7 years ago, I was coming from a school in Lafayette Parish where we shared a resource officer. And when I got to Broussard, I was told that due to the kindness of the Broussard City Council and the police department, they foot the extra money that would normally be required to have a resource officer there all day. So we as a school have been fortunate and blessed for many, many years to have a resource officer with us all day, every day. I've had the pleasure of working with 3 of them. They have all been upstanding, outstanding gentlemen who have done everything we've asked them to do. I could repeat everything about the community and what all that entails. You have heard that. They are part of us, they are part of the school, they are part of our community, and there's a relationship between the school and not only the resource officer, but the police department as well. And I can stand here and say, if I have to call, they're coming. And when I say they, it can be the whole Broussard Police Department if necessary. And I'm sure it's the same with the other local agencies that are there. What I want to talk about, though, is what we owe children. We owe children safety, and we owe them an education, not just book-wise, but we owe them an education on how to be productive citizens in society. One thing resource officers provide is a way for children and families to have a positive relationship with police officers. And that is very, very important this day and age. Also, there are times when children may not feel comfortable coming to an administrator, but they will feel comfortable going to that police officer. So the relationship between the school resource officer and the faculty, the staff, the children is very, very important. All schools in this day and age, in my opinion, need a school resource officer. We are soft targets, and we have to keep in mind that our job is to keep our children safe, but to also make sure that they get a full quality education, and our resource officers help us with that. Not to mention helping with traffic and football games and basketball games and dances and pep rallies and everything else, taking children home, bringing children to school. Resource officers will go with the social worker to a house to get a child who doesn't want to come to school. They do all of those different things that we don't see anywhere on paper, but they really do contribute to the overall quality of education that our children receive. So to the board, thank you for having the foresight of having this meeting to try to make sure we're doing right by our children and securing their education. But please keep in mind that we desperately need our resource officers in schools. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Renee Nunez, and I'm the principal from Youngsville Middle School. And you've heard a lot of truth in this room tonight, and I wish that we could double the force at all of our schools. But the one thing that we didn't talk about are the things that are facing our children at younger and younger ages each year. And we are blessed for the first time with a full-time resource officer. And he is a resource not only to our students, but to our parents in the community, because they are facing decisions and they are hearing things about activities that their children are participating in. And they need good counsel how to keep their children out of the law, out of the justice system. And sometimes, as much power as administrators would like to think that we have, it's a whole lot different when a man with a badge is talking to you about how to stay out of trouble, the decisions you need to make, the life that you should be leading. And a lot of times they have helped us to diffuse some of the situations that are happening with custody battles, with domestic abuse things that are going on. The children want to know what their rights are. The parents want to know what their rights are. And our SRO in our community has been an amazing resource to faculty, to staff, and to parents. And I just wanted to add that because sometimes legal counsel can be very expensive. And if you have a friendly face, they're not always going to want to go to the PD with their issues because they're afraid of what that next step may be. But they will certainly come to school and ask to speak to our resource officer so they can know what their options are before they have to use them.
I'm Renee White, the principal of MP Moss Preparatory Academy. And we all know that I get the students who have been expelled from their base schools. My SRO is absolutely phenomenal. He doesn't judge the students who come in. They are treated just like any student at any other school. He goes over and beyond anything that could be expected. Do I believe that elementary schools need SROs? I've come in from being a principal at Alice Boucher. I do think that every school needs to have an SRO, but he not only serves as the SRO at our school, if any of the elementary schools in the area or nearby need assistance, he's like, Ms. White, I'm coming right back. I need to go to J.W. Falk. Ms. White, I'm coming right back. I need to go here. I need to go there. He is Johnny on the spot. I know Sergeant Seiss comes just to check in on him, and I'm like, you don't need to check in on him. He's absolutely phenomenal. He's absolutely proactive in a whole lot of things. Like everybody else has said, the ties to the community are essential. We get students from all over the district, and it doesn't matter where they come from. He can get information that we need in order to support our babies in the way that we need to. So the Lafayette, and nobody had come up, I hate to speak in public, but nobody had come up to talk about our Lafayette Police Department. They had Youngsville and Broussard, but I just want to brag on our SRO program in Lafayette Parish because they go over and beyond. There was an incident that really was not major. I don't know what code he gave, but the street was filled with police officers. I'm like, what happened, and did I miss something? But everybody was there. They were there to help and to assist. It was wonderful, and I cannot brag enough about the work that they do and the commitment that they have to our schools, and not just to the schools that they're assigned to, but to every school in the district. So yes, we do. They are vital, and we appreciate it, and I love the Lafayette Police Department. So thank you for all that you guys do.
Great, thank you. We are going to shift back. I failed to mention something at the beginning of the meeting. We're going to go over some subjects later on in the meeting, part of probably 1.5, and then when we start talking about item 1.7 and 1.8, we're going to go into what's called executive session. And at that time, we typically go into executive session in that conference room, but we can't all fit in there. So when we do go into the executive session, I'm going to ask, obviously the press is going to leave. We're going to cut off the feed to AOC. We're going to ask the audience members to leave. If you're not one of those folks, the board or one of the guest police officers or some of the commissioned officers here, we're going to ask you to step out into the hall. But that's going to come a little bit later in the meeting. I just kind of wanted to give you a heads up before that. And the reason is because we're going to be talking about things that we just don't want to broadcast in public. Because they're security related. Mr. Hidalgo, yeah. Yes, sir.
I wanted to take an opportunity as well to address this item before we move on. First, I want to say that I think it's clear that there's probably zero resistance to the idea that, from this board, to the idea that police officers are needed on every campus. It doesn't matter what level of education. We may have disagreements on how to pay for it, who pays for it, and that's going to come much later, but I don't think there's a disagreement on the need. So thank you all for being here and speaking out. I do want to say that out of the 8 schools that I represent through constituents, 5 of them have SRO officers. And I'm proud to say that I know at least 4 of those SROs on some level. And I want to take the time, just because it's the district that I represent, I want to take the time to thank Chief Boudreaux, to thank Chief Deku, and to thank Sheriff Mark Garber for what your departments provide to the schools that I know I'm proud to represent. I know those officers, most of them, a couple of them pretty well, and they're awesome people. And so I don't believe that any one of you is more competent than the other. I think that every one of you sitting here tonight are extremely professional and run your departments extremely well. But with that said, I see the importance, I'm not going to say the need, I see the importance of the local feel, and I see it because I talk to the officers. Whether or not it's the sheriff's deputy at Milton, or whether or not it's at Southside or Broussard Middle or Youngsville Middle or any other school, I see the need for that local touch. And I want to thank you all of you, but certainly the ones that I know, for what you provide to the communities. Again, the need is, there's no question about the need, so I don't think that really needs to be discussed any further. I think it's, how do we do it? What is the best way to do it? And I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you all. Thank you for being here.
Mr. Angel.
Thank you. I'd like to make a comment. I've been an elected official for decades.
1974.
The year he was born. I want to say that when a politician, I like to say, when people say, "Oh, you're just another politician," I like to joke and say, I'm not a politician, I'm a statesman. But I am a politician. I'm in politics. I run for public office just like all of you chiefs do and the sheriff does. When a politician wants to change something, they start off the way we started off this meeting. Everybody feels warm, everybody's agreeing on everything, and we have fuzzy feelings. I want to remind you what month we're in, and I want to remind you of the saying, quite an old saying, beware the Ides of March. Thank you.
All right. With that, I'm going to shift now to this should be a pretty brief topic. It's titled Indemnification and Insurance Requirements. When going through your agreements, obviously in order for us to work together, we have to have some sort of contractual agreement. So we have some. We have some that are fairly recent and some that are very old. And I say we internally, LPSS, I feel like we have a need to do some updating to those agreements. I've asked Mr. Hammonds, our board attorney, to review the agreements. He's reviewed all the agreements. He's come up with, and I'll let him speak for himself, but he's basically come up with an agreement that he finds to be a good agreement, but also it has mutual. When you're developing a legal agreement, you can have one that protects us, and you can have one that protects you, or we can have one that protects both of us. And he's found an agreement which he feels provides mutual protection regarding specifically the indemnity clause, and probably some other updated language in other clauses. And I'll just let him briefly speak about that.
Mr. Knezek, members of the board, and guests. After hearing all those positive comments, I'm a little reluctant for a lawyer to speak, but I did have the opportunity to go back and review all of the existing agreements between the school board and the various agencies, and it's interesting to me that some of them are relatively similar, but some of them are totally different. The most recent apparently was the one with the city of Youngsville last July. Earlier than that, it was Lafayette City Parish Consolidated Government in June of last year. In 8 of 15, we had one for a canine officer for the sheriff. And then in 13, we had Karen Crow. And then we go back to 08, and you've answered some of my questions already, because I couldn't figure out why all the agreements were dated 08. And when I hear the description that you started the program in 07, well, that makes perfect sense to me. That's why all the rest of the agreements are dated 08. The only reason I mention those dates is because, some of the prices, for example, that were listed in some of those contracts were 08 prices. And I suspect, without talking to Billy or anybody else, that the rates that are being paid are probably not the same as are reflected in those documents. And that they have escalated over the years like all other prices have escalated over the years. Which means that it would be probably beneficial for us to have new, clean documents, for all those existing relationships. I know that we have auditor types around there that are going to be looking to find out what documents you have to support which payments. And so we may want to look at these documents and try to bring them all up to speed and to make them as similar as we can. I don't really see any difference in the language of some of them, or why there's difference in the language of some of them. But I think that this gives us the opportunity, this discussion and follow-up discussions give us the opportunity to try to get all on the same page and come up with a standard document, which shouldn't be very difficult to do. My firm has actually prepared a number of these documents all over the state of Louisiana, and the one that we've done most recently was for the city of Mendon and the school system there, and it addresses some of these things perhaps a little bit more legalistically. It makes references to hold harmless clauses, and it makes references to workers' comp obligations and unemployment compensation obligations and other business type decisions that everybody has to address anyway. The existing agreements, for example, have all had just one paragraph in them, which reads as follows: each party shall bear the risk of its own actions and the actions of its personnel as it does with its day-to-day operations, and determine for itself what kind of insurance, if any, and in what amounts it should carry. Well, that's not very descriptive from the standpoint of a lawyer as to what it is that each party is responsible for, nor does it give any reference to what kind of insurance or how much insurance should be purchased, because we just have to be honest that we live in a litigious world. And we know that, as I tell my school systems, you only have two kind of school systems, those that have been sued and those that will be sued. And that's pretty much the case. So I think if we get around to putting together a new document that would be beneficial for all and consistent for all the different agencies, I think that gives us the opportunity to address this issue on indemnification and privileges. I do want to make it clear, though, that I've never seen an agreement that didn't apply equally both directions. I'm not suggesting, for example, that the sheriff's office or the law enforcement officers take the burden for responsibility for injuries or accidents that occur during the course of the operation of our schools. I think that that's a 50-50 proposition. If it's a fault of an officer, well, then the law enforcement agency should be responsible for addressing that. If it's the fault of a school employee, then the school board should be responsible for addressing that. And I really think that that's been the intent all along with the language, each party shall bear the risk of its own actions and the actions of its personnel. I think that's what the intent was, and I think that when we come up with a new agreement, I think that we can say it perhaps a little more legalistically than that, but I think the intent will be the same, and that is that both agencies will be responsible for the actions of their own. There'll be some other suggested changes or improvements that I'd like to see in here, dealing with the training and the levels of training and the types of training. It says currently that there will be training, but most of the agreements don't specify what type of training or what level of training. I'd like to have that specified, because as sure as you have a situation on a campus, you're going to have a suit filed where one of the first allegations made is that the people didn't have the proper training. And so I'd like to nip that in the bud by having in these agreements what that level of training needed to be. And again, they already have it. The officers that we're hearing about tonight already had this level of training. It's just a matter of putting it into a legal document that we can use in the event that there is some type of litigation over an incident that would occur. So again, I would just mention that I think that we have a good start, but I do think it'd be better to have a uniform document for all the different agencies that address some of these other concerns. And Mr. Knezek, if I just take a moment of personal liberty as well, I was very curious to hear Joe's comments about the SSOs, because there are some systems around the state that have used the SSOs. One system that we represent has its own police department. And, it really says something. First off, when you have to come to a meeting and talk to a lawyer, that's bad enough. But when you talk about a school system having its own police department, I mean, that speaks volumes. And of course, the way that they did that there was they went to the voters for a tax proposition for school safety. And the voters were kind enough to approve a tax dedicated for school safety. And the proceeds of that tax allowed them to pay for their own internal department. And, if there was ever a time in the history of the United States that I think the public would be more willing to consider a tax for school safety, it is today. And so I've mentioned it to the board before. I mentioned it last week or 2 weeks ago at the Louisiana School Board's convention, that as you go forward with your planning in this area, I would encourage you to consider the possibility of a small millage that could generate some funds to pay not only for SROs, but you can pay for things like better lighting at your schools, perhaps more security cameras, other suggestions that might come from your law enforcement officers as to ways to improve security in your schools. Everybody has the same end in sight, and that is to make the schools as safe and secure as they can be. And so I think that this would be an opportunity for you to be able to present to your voters the opportunity for them to do something to help you accomplish that end. And I say that simply because of the number of incidents that we've had lately, and the fact that the whole world knows that this is a situation that needs to be addressed.
All right, thank you. Does anybody want to speak on contractual stuff, indemnity stuff?
Just like to bring
Yes,
up
sir.
one thing on that, is that you're looking at, 5 or 6 different municipalities. We don't have the authority to sign any contracts. It goes to the mayors. But we also have our own individual legal counsels as well that want to put their own verbiage, which they feel is appropriate as needed. So I don't know if it's something that recommendation is that if y'all legal counsel would schedule a meeting with maybe all of our legal counsels, if they can get them all in the same room together to come up with a mutual one-time agreement and contract so that the verbiage. Because what's going to happen here is you're going to send it to Scott, I'll get it, I'll look it over, send it to our council, he'll give it to my mayor, he'll send it back to the council, and then we send it to you, and then you tweak what, it goes back and forth for months because of verbiage. So my recommendation, if possible, on that is that if the councils can get together with each agency and each municipality to have that one meeting that they can kind of nip it up one time.
Thank you. Ms. Morris?
have to leave early, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions out of order, if I may. But one of them on the contract is, of course, I'm an attorney as well, so I agree fully with our counsel that we need uniformity with our contracts, and I think that it is something that can be figured out, even though attorneys do like to be adversarial. That's what we get paid for. We can get there. But we developed our SRR program very piecemeal, right? We added one here, then one here, and one in that there, and so the contracts are different because we had different counsel for the school board, different counsel for your areas as well. But I think that we can get there to get something uniform. But I'd also like to see on the cost list, several of them say that we pay a portion of the SR salary, but do we know what the percentages are for each? So for example, City of Broussard, we pay $25,200, and it says we pay a portion. So what portion of that? Well, it says 50% of the training.
I'd have to get back to you on that part.
And I don't need to know the numbers right now because this is a workshop, but I'd like to make that uniform as well. I think that the negotiations or because I don't want to open a can of worms, but this is a workshop and we're looking at new possibilities, and I fully respect and agree with everything that every single principal up here said. I value what all of you do, not only in our schools, but in our entire community. But if I take a step back and look at this from the lens of an attorney, my first thought is we have one law enforcement agency that covers the entire parish. So if there's a district somewhere who doesn't like the form of our contract, we have a second choice, right? So I think that we can get there through negotiations because that's the business part of the deal. But I would like to also see uniformity in the percentage. If we have a uniform contract, then we should be saying we're paying X percentage of the salary and you pick up the rest. Otherwise, we're going to go to the other department and kind of work things out like that. So I think that it's important to get the uniformity. And I also think, and I fully agree that we should have an SRO on every campus and probably 2 on some of our larger campuses or with the older students. And so, but that's a money thing, and like Mr. Knezek said at the very beginning, if we start talking about adding SROs on, that means we got to take something away someplace else, and it's budget season. So, you know, it's going to be up to us to weigh the pros and cons or the safety issues versus this academic support for those sorts of things. But of course, if we're able to negotiate with any of your departments where we pay a lesser percentage and you pick up more of it, then that gives us more leeway to put more people into our school systems. So, so anyway, Mr. Craig, not for this meeting necessarily, but as we progress through this process, kind of having more detail, I guess, on the percentages. And I guess my other question for any of you is, I know that a lot of you go out of your way and do things when you're off duty, but for any of the schools, if there's a dance, do the SROs go to the dance, and do we pay overtime for that? Is it outside the salary that's listed on our paper here?
Yes.
Okay, so what we need is a full cost of what we pay in addition to this base.
And I
Ms.
believe
Morse,
one
I
of
think
your
we have
attachments
that.
has that.
And I can tell you,
Which
summary,
attachment? Because I don't see it.
it's about $100,000 a year that we pay in
Overtime and
in non 8 to 5 kind of. I shouldn't
so
say 8 to 5.
where's the attachment on that one?
I thought it was on this one, but it's not.
The only one I see is the chart with just the general information. So anyway, those are just some questions that I'd like to have more detailed answers to as we progress through our discussion of school safety, which it really is a huge priority now, and nobody ever imagines that it's going to happen in their district. But obviously that's something that's very difficult to predict, even with a lot of warning signs, like apparently happened in the Parkland area. So
I can.
Okay. Wait, whoever's come. Okay, but you have to come up. So
I
the
can answer
schools
a question.
pay out of their budget for.
If it is anything outside of the regular school day, if it's a dance after school, if it's a basketball game, anything like that, the school pays any charge.
Okay. And that's the same is true for like bus drivers on field trips and things like that. It's the ordinary. Okay.
I'd like to answer another question, if
Okay.
you don't mind, real quick. 'Cause
Sure.
I know you're in limited. Chief Deku and I were the only ones that were in office at the time when this originally started. And in the negotiations originally, just to kind of enlighten you a little bit, back in '07 when this all started, the original agreement was we provide the resource officer. The school board would pay for the salary of the police officer, and the municipalities would pay for any benefits, retirement, insurance, and all that for the resource officer. We would also pay for the vehicle of the resource officer, and then any training, such as school resource officer certifications, was split 50-50 between the municipality and the school board.
Right. And I guess my goal is to really look in detail at the money so we can figure out how to put more of your guys in our schools. We have to, everybody's got a crunch budget. Y'all have to do your budgets every year as well, so y'all know how painful the process is. But if we want more people in our schools, we're going to have to figure out a way to get that done. So there's going to have to be some give and take probably all the way around, I think, and it's going to be a very tedious and long process, I think.
All right, so that's a great segue into 1.5. It's entitled, How Do We Currently Run the SRO Program? And for that, it's more, I would like to focus right now before we go into executive session on things that Mr. Craig can brief us on, cost, things that you guys can brief us on, supervision, training. I know we've already touched on it, but if we could talk a little bit more specifically on, like Mr. Hammond said, what's the status quo? What is SRO? What does it mean to be an SRO trained officer? And supervision, how do you supervise those personnel? I don't want to get into the command and control and incident type events. Those are the things I'd like to talk about later, so if you could refrain from talking about those things. So I'm going to start it off with Mr. Craig. If you could review the data that you were presenting earlier. And again, this is for the board's knowledge and the public's knowledge on how we currently have it structured, how we pay for it, the cost to the system. In round numbers, right now, SRO cost to us is about $1.5 million a year for the schools that we currently pay for. That's primarily our, well, it's not all of our schools. And so, Mr. Craig, if you could go ahead and review that.
So that total cost is actually closer to $1 million for the SROs, and then $500,000 for the games,
yeah,
the dances. So it's $1 million as opposed to 1.5.
Well, can you hold on before you say that? It's $1 million for SROs, $500,000 for SSOs, and then another $100,000 for security.
For security, yes, sir.
So SRO and SSO budget is $1.5 million.
Yes, sir. Yes. Typically in our high schools, and this is new for this year, in our big high schools, the traditional high schools, we have 2 SROs assigned, and our middle schools have 1 SRO. We have 1 at Moss Prep. We don't have any SROs in the elementary schools, and typically what we do is I work with the different chiefs, I work with the different SROs or their designees. As it was mentioned earlier, the principals have cell phone numbers for their chiefs and their SROs, and we typically cover the elementary schools on a case-by-case basis. So there were a couple issues in Broussard this past fall, and so I'd make the call to Mr. Mouton and say, look, can you spare your SRO? We need him at another school. I think at least once or twice he'd already made the call and sent his SRO to the other school. So our principals communicate, they talk to the law enforcement agency, whoever's providing the safety at their school, and we allocate those SROs to the elementary schools as needed, and that happens frequently. At one point, we only have 1 person between the Career Center and David Thibodeau, and part of that's related to the number of incidents that get reported. Thibodeau's starting to grow, so one of the conditions written in most of our contracts is that based on a determination by the chief or by the governing body for that enforcement agency, typically the designee is the chief or a sergeant. If we need to move an SRO to another school, we move an SRO to another school. So the SROs working with their supervisors, they understand where the needs are, where the incidents are, where there's potential hot spots, and if need be, we can move somebody on, well, immediate notice. But I think recently I was working with Lafayette PD, and we kind of made the decision we got a lower enrollment at this one site, and not a lot of cases. We're starting to see a rise in some cases at another school. Let's allocate that officer to there. So most of the chiefs have my phone number, and all the principals do, and we work, whether it's an immediate response to a situation or something that we think is coming down the road that we just want to be proactive on. I work with all of these gentlemen, I work with my principals, and we allocate those individuals as needed. And that works nicely with the big high schools having 2 SROs, so you can send somebody to a middle school who might need backup, or you can send somebody at an elementary school that doesn't have anybody and still have your base school covered. And again, with radio technology and cell phones, we're able to move people quickly whenever the situation arises.
Thank you. And if you gentlemen would maybe talk about training. What is SRO training? Is there consistency? If there's not, if there's not, then let's talk about that. There's not, and maybe it's different for each department. Maybe there is no national criteria. I don't know.
Well, you have a basic SRO certification and an advanced SRO certification. There's conferences that occur every year. Usually they're during the summer because all the resource officers are out of school, where you can, if you send them to a conference, they can basically receive both certifications in one conference. And then they go periodically for research on that and updates. I send mine every other year because it doesn't always, it's not always feasible on the training part of it because you never know where the conference is going to be. And then that's just a minimum on the SRO part, and each department has their own internal training and in-service training that goes on and mandates all the state qualifications that we have to have. So it brings interview and interrogation schools. I know I send my SROs to that just for the interview process, so that when they talking to kids, or just to help build that relation and know where to go with it. But a lot of these, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of these officers that I am putting in my schools have quite a bit of patrol experience. So they already bring in the quality of and the experience and the training and advanced training, like a lot of other chiefs are doing as well. So you're not getting a fresh person out of the academy that's going straight into a school. You're getting a certified, qualified police officer that's already been through advanced training to start off with. But the only mandate that we have is the basic and the advanced SROs.
Do those certifications have any sort of expiration or recommended renewal?
No.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I'd be interested as each of you speak if you guys could hit what Chief Leger just hit, where he kind of differentiated. So you had your basic certification, but here's something extra that Scott PD does. Where he said they send them to interview interrogation school. If there's anything that you guys may do in your own departments or your own agencies that kind of differentiates where you feel like there's value added to what your officers are able to bring to the schools, I'd love to hear that so I can be educated on it.
I'm sorry, Ken. One of the problems, going back to the training, one of the problems that we have is in the contract, the original contract, is that an SROs, we're not allowed to have an SRO off of your campus for time greater than 5 working days. If they are off your campus for longer than 5 working days during the school period, then I'm required to take one of my police officers and fill that spot. Okay, so it's not always feasible that these extra training times come in during the summer months or during the Easter break or the Christmas break or Thanksgiving break when you can send these officers. So, we try not to take our officers off of, like my departmental standard is they can't take vacation time during school. When school's in, they have to go to school. They have to work, so they can adjust their time just like the teachers do and your staff do, appropriately on that part. So it's very difficult to add that extra training compared to a patrolman. I can take him off patrol and send him to a school for 2 or 3 days, and that's fine. But we do add those extras. Sorry.
And Justin, just so you understand, the state requires a post-certified officer to go through 20 hours of in service per year, and it's broken up into certain areas, certain number of hours in firearms, officer safety, legal, etc. So every one of us will have the same. And with respect to that, on top of the 20 hours in our community, and we don't have an SRO, but we ask for an additional 40 hours of in-service training, but it's different based on your job assignment in my department.
They go through the yearly certifications. They went through the SRO and the advanced. Mine are brand new in there. And this will be their first summer off. They are looking for interview and interrogation and any juvenile-related schools that they can attend.
Yes, and in our in-service program throughout the year, we also do juvenile procedures as electives through our in-house in-service program, on top of the rest of what you just heard. Right, and juvenile code of criminal procedure, all of our guys are always up to speed on that. And if they have a situation where it escalates, we have an investigator that'll go to the school and assist the SRO or supervisors, road supervisor or their supervisor.
Same thing for Karen Crow. We have 3 full-time SROs, 2 at the high school and 1 at Karen Crow Middle. But I also have a certified, a 4th certified officer that if one of the SROs in Karen Crow cannot be there for any reason, then that 4th officer will take the place of that other SRO that is not able to make it or needs to go to some type of training. After this year, all my SROs will be advanced SRO certified. So they do keep up with the regular training that a police officer has to keep up with on a yearly basis. And in addition, they go to this SRO training, active shooter training, any type of training that we can suck up from the sheriff. We try to send our people as much as possible, because I don't think there's any chief up here that's going to say these guys have too much training. When a police officer starts to think that he's had enough training, well, it's time for him to retire and go to the house. And you can never ever stop training. So we want to continue what we have right now, and keep up with this yearly training that we have.
Sure. All of our officers with the city police are certified every summer. No matter where it's at, we go to the SRO training. We have a training of a 40-hour training post that we have in-house that we also do. We do a lot of active training, active shooter training. During the summertime is mostly when all the training is done, and that's when we do it. We have such a large group of officers, just need a training instructor, and I have enough officers to have a class. So we do a lot of training.
I think it's fair to say that everyone is substantially similar. The sheriff's office owns and operates the local police training academy, and so my deputies are trained. It just varies by assignment as to the level of training, because they have their day jobs to go to, and myself, just like all of the chiefs, have to staff our day jobs. And we're not like the military where we can take a whole unit off the line and train them. But I believe that every agency here probably exceeds the minimum amount of training recommended by the Post Council every year. And I think we have a well-trained force across the parish.
Yes, sir, Mr. Centani.
I heard a couple of you mention active shooter training, specifically Chief Leger mentioned you held a drill at Acadiana High School. Is that correct? What is the percentage of you guys, or maybe all of you, that have active shooter training for your officers, but also do you have any plans, or is it on your radar to have something like that in our schools to help out our staff and students?
In April, we already put something out. The entire parish, everybody is going to train together. We're doing active shooter with, next month. Yeah, and we'll be doing it, during the Easter break. Are we doing that? What school? No, Jay Wallace. Yeah, Jay Wallace, Jay.
And our officers have done active shooter training as well. our whole department has. We've done it in our theaters, churches, different environments, so as well as the ones for the school. But this is unique because all the SROs are going to go together, because they're going to work together if an unforeseen incident occurs in one of our schools. So it puts them all on the same page as SROs. Sheriff, I'm sorry.
We also all, when the teachers have in-service training, we go meet with them, and when they're together as a group, it's easier for us to discuss the active shooter scenarios with them. We did that at the beginning of the school year with every school in our municipality. So we all knew we were on the same page. They knew what to expect from us if that situation were to occur, and what's expected of them, governed by y'all policies.
So I mean, you guys just keep jogging my memory about different things. So speaking to the teachers before school starts, so that's a great point. Dr. Aguilar, would probably be a question for you. How difficult are the logistics of having each municipality speak to their teachers during the in-service in August, before school starts, but when all the teachers are there doing their professional development?
Actually, I think we can probably arrange that. We've got some ideas about further training to take advantage, particularly at the schools. We've got those 6 early release days built into the calendar for next year. So we've done some preliminary discussions about using one of those days for active shooter drills. Our teachers need to experience that whole process. We think that would be what we're envisioning, is that within each maybe high school zone, we would ask these partners of ours to go in and conduct an active shooter drill at a high school, as an example, and bring in the elementary teachers, the middle school teachers, so that everybody can see and experience that event, so that we can be better prepared.
I'm sorry, if I could interrupt real quick. They didn't mention it, but next Friday, the 23rd, we're actually doing, thank you, Sheriff, we're actually doing an active shooter response, not an actual dry run, but a training through the Sheriff's Department for all school administrators, half in the morning and half in the afternoon, for Friday, the 23rd of March, next week.
All right. I did have one question, and it was regarding the SRO basic and advanced certification. Do you, as professionals, recommend, is that kind of a fire and forget type thing, or is that something that you would recommend a person get refreshers on, or is, and if so, what frequency, or is the in-service training that each one of you do every year as a part of having officers, is that adequate to stay current? So I guess my question is, when Mr. Hammonds is drawing up the agreement, how long is an SRO certification good for? Should we retrain every 2 years, 3 years, 10 years?
I think the National Association has recommendations on what the best practices are, but you asked a couple of different questions. You know, we talk about the active shooter training and frequency, and I think that the movement, certainly at my agency, is to engage in more violent active training. Pretty much currently we're pushing the limits with the workers' comp injuries that we're getting from putting people through as much simulated stress as we can. So the answer is really, we haven't found, I think, the sweet spot, but we're realizing, especially in light of the accusations leveled at the Broward County Sheriff's Office and the controversy surrounding whether or not the deputy knew he should have gone in, did go in, didn't go in. We all believe, every one of us sitting at this table expects our officers to run in toward the sound of gunfire. And all of us are expendable, including myself, if we have children who are being involved in an active homicide. So, whatever it takes to where we can be sure, as certain as we can be, because there's no 100%, right? But whatever it takes to be as certain can be, that we will have an adequate response, is what we have to do. And I think that involves training with simunitions and simulating increasing levels of stress. So, you know, we're pretty well trained here across the parish, and I have confidence in our police forces.
All right, I think that answered the, yes, sir.
Again, speaking as a lawyer, that training is invaluable when it comes to defending against a lawsuit. And one of the things that I encourage our principals to do is to maintain logs or other records that show the training that they have provided to members of their staff. And so I'm sure that each of the agencies already does that, but if you don't, I would say from a legal perspective, that's critically important, because you know the thing that you're going to get almost every time is an allegation of lack of proper training. And if you can pull out a log or a list, or doesn't have to be very fancy, if you're able to point out the fact that you did this and this and this and this and this, it goes a long way toward successfully defending against these cases.
Thank you. All right, the other, Mr. Broussard.
To make one comment. Coming from a more experienced time of life, Ms. Angel and myself, you know, first I want to thank all of you for coming here and taking the interest in trying to make our schools safe and our kids safe. But I don't know, Mr. Angel, if we came from a more cowardly time in life or more respectable time in life, to where I would never imagine that we would have to have our schools with men or women with guns. But to put it ugly, not police officers, not law officers, but people with guns on our campus. It is hard to imagine that. I personally, I don't like it, but I certainly understand the need. Understand the need for it. And you know, as these shooting around, I guess Lafayette is a more friendly town, and I hope it stays that way. I hope we don't ever be in the news for something negative like that, not negative at all. And it's just hard to imagine that we've come to this time in life to where we had to have armed men or women on our campus to protect our kids. Yeah.
All right, thank you. The next, I had one more question, and it was more, I've talked to several of you about this, and it was just more of a question on, and maybe each one of you runs your departments differently, but the longevity on how long you would have an SRO in the position. And I'm going to summarize what I think I've learned. I think I've learned that an SRO is a very special type of police officer. They're specially trained. They have to, it's a balance between the rugged protector and the, for lack of better words, fatherly type, nurturing, and it's a unique talent. So not all officers, not all people, I probably lack in some of the nurturing aspects, but it seems like being an SRO is a very special person. So you may choose to keep the SRO in a position where they're serving as an SRO for many, many years. And I guess my question is, if there is a differing opinion from that, if you could comment. I don't think I need anyone to say, hey, that's what we do, because I think if somebody differs from that opinion, I would love to hear it. All right, great, so that answers that. The next thing I'd like to talk about is civil service and non-civil service, more as an education for the board. After that, I'm going to ask the board to vote to go in executive session to talk about 1.7 and 1.8. The next topic I put on there, I'm Dale's son, in case you don't know. I'm Dale Knezek, retired Lafayette City Police Officer's son. And I grew up literally running the halls of Lafayette City PD. Some of the officers in the back said, I remember you when you were this tall. Some of you served with my father. Many of you bled with my father. I've heard the stories. So I learned a little bit about civil service versus non-civil service. And as I see us moving forward, it's highly likely that we're going to see a lot more interaction between all of your agencies. Maybe not, but maybe so. So what I'm asking is, is there anything legally preventing you from working together in a metro type environment where, as I understand it, I'm not a police officer. As I understand it, you have metro narcotics, you have metro crime scene. So what I'm asking is there anything preventing you from that? Now, there may be, at the same time, you can also tell me there may be philosophical and or personality reasons why it doesn't work so well. But what I want to know, is there any reason you cannot legally work in a metro type organization? And in my brain, it seems synonymous to how in the military, when I was in the Navy, I spent about a year working for the Army. The Army had operational command of Lieutenant Knezek, but the Navy retained administrative command of Lieutenant Knezek. Promotions, pay, all those things, my training, all those things still went through the Navy. But operationally, the Army could tell me what to do. So, and maybe that doesn't translate it exactly, but I think that you get to the point of what I'm asking. Is there anything precluding you, besides personality and or culture, from working in a joint environment? And I open that up to you guys. Yes, sir.
We had a conversation, and Chief Anderson brought up some real good points in the last Monday when we had our meeting with the chief and the sheriffs. We have meet every other month, and the only difference is that there's certain things that, as elected officials, that the four of us are here as chiefs. There's things in our communities that we may get involved in or want to have direct contact with our SRO. If it's something special, like if I bring in eight extra officers that we brought in today to Cayeta High and Fort Scott Middle, our SROs coordinate that. And so, but it's direct contact with us as elected officials in our cities, for our people, for our schools, protecting our kids. So that's the only thing that I would see that would be an issue that, in this capacity, that we would have to definitely work on the area of if there is another person that is in charge of a metro division, that we still have powers to have direct contact and supervise and supersede what we need in our schools. If it's something, a special detail that needs to be pulled, or something special that needs to be taken care of for a family or a kid or something like that, as elected officials, we need to have that direct contact. So that would be my only concern that I would have.
Thank you.
Civil service does not prohibit.
No, this is not a civil service
Okay.
issue.
They do it now. Lafayette Police is civil service, and they're in the metro unit with the sheriff.
Yeah, we currently have a metro crime scene and a metro narcotics unit that we do work with the sheriff, because we are Lafayette Parish, Lafayette City. Training wise, we train basically the same, so we do work together in that aspect with the sheriff's department.
There's nothing that prevents me from, either assuming my personnel from being in command of a joint force, or from allowing my deputies to be supervised by another entity. I was under the impression that there was some civil service, issues with that. But if that's what all the chiefs have gone on record saying there's no issue with, then I certainly defer to them.
Ms. Morrison.
Yes, presently, what do you all do together? Do y'all meet and discuss anything, like the municipalities and Lafayette Parish? Y'all do meet on, what do you meet on? What do you discuss now and make decisions kind of as a group?
Yeah, we meet with the sheriff. We meet at the sheriff's office every other month and discuss situations that are going through, what we're dealing with across the parish as far as for crime and stuff. But one of the things that was implemented many years ago, I want to say it was when Burnell was here maybe, we had a safe schools meeting. And the safe school meeting, we started off with Chief Kraft, which was the chief in Lafayette. And the safe school was all of your chiefs, the superintendent, and whoever board members wanted to attend. It was usually at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the Chiefs Boardroom in Lafayette PD, and we discussed school issues only, and a lot of security and a lot of safety things. And for whatever reason, that has, since Chief Kraft is retired, we have a new superintendent. For some kind of way, it just kind of fell away at the side, and we haven't revisited on that. So I think that's something that, to do what we do in law enforcement, this group right here, along with the fire chief from Lafayette and Parks and Recreation, we meet every other month. But I think that we need to get the Safe Schools meetings back together again as well.
I'm glad that you asked that question about what we do. You know, every other month when we meet with Sheriff Garber, there's several different things that we talk about. Not only what's going on in our municipality, but we share a lot of intel, a lot of information. I think that we have something here that is very, very unique in our parish. I don't think that you ever in this parish have a sheriff and the municipalities working together like we do right now. And we know that we're all here for one reason, and that's to serve the public and to get things done. And there is no room at all for anybody to say, I'm not working with them because I don't like his tactics or I don't like his policies. You have to put that aside. We're here for the public, and most importantly, we're here for the kids in these schools, and that's what we need to worry about. So I don't think there's, like the sheriff said, I don't think there's one thing that we can't all work for one common goal together.
I think it's a great idea. Like Chief Leger mentioned, that we start that up again, Safe School Committee, and involve everyone and move forward with that. Thank you.
And Ms. Morrison, also just quickly, I don't know that there's a week that goes by. I'm the baby chief, I'm the youngest, but not a week that goes by that I don't speak to one of them about something, advice, and we exchange emails very regularly on a lot of things. So there's a lot of issues that we discuss amongst each other, and I'm proud of Lafayette Parish law enforcement. I really am.
Plus the fact that we have all worked together in some facet through our whole law enforcement career, even Sheriff Garber when he was a prosecutor. So we all know each other almost as well as we know our own families.
Thank you for asking.
Mr. Centani.
I have a specific question. Something, once again, I like talking to you, Chief Leger. You make me think of new questions.
We throw you some candy is what it is.
Well, you know, like
coming to the games.
You know, I've gotten candy from him before. I always enjoy when I see him at a football game. So it was communication, and I think it's been made abundantly clear, not only from our administrators, that having local police officers is very important because they know the kids, they know the families. They can be in touch with what's going on in the community before it comes into their school, and so they can head it off. So one unique aspect of Lafayette Parish is that we have, I would suppose that every single one of you has someone in your jurisdiction that attends Lafayette High School, and maybe they have a younger brother that goes to Karen Crow Middle School, or maybe they have an older sister that also goes to Karen Crow High School. So in addition to your very legitimate concern about being in contact with your SRO, so you know he knows what's going on in the community and you have contact with him, how do we currently, and maybe there's nothing formal in place, maybe it's as simple as an email or a phone call or something like that, but how does the information from an SRO at Lafayette High get to the SRO in Karen Crow? Or how does the Karen Crow PD find out from the Lafayette City Police officer? Because the unique aspect of Lafayette Parish Schools is that we have kids who cross jurisdictional lines frequently, even within families. And so I'm just curious to know how that operates today. Or is it as simple as you pick up your cell phone and you give them a call?
Every year, usually school starts in August now, not September. Showed my age right there. So school started in August, usually the beginning of October. We usually let about a month start of school, and I host with the privilege and the direction of Mr. Lejeune at Acadia High School, I host the very first SRO school meeting for the year every year. So every school resource officer in Lafayette Parish comes to Acadia High School. We have a meeting, it usually lasts about an hour, sometimes an hour and a half. We have a meal, but they all get to meet each other. They get to know each other. Sergeant Leger and Sergeant Sykes with Lafayette PD. When this was put together, we pretty all much agreed that Lafayette PD, being they had the largest agency and the largest group of SROs would pretty much spearhead the communications part of where we at. And so every year there's a roster that they put out. It's an updated list with the SROs, with the chiefs, and everyone is in connection, supervisors of all the SROs. It's for our phone numbers, cell numbers, email address, and everything else. So there's bulk emails that go out. The SROs get to know each other on a first name basis, even the new SROs that are, just currently transferred. Like Ricky had his with Southside High School, he has 2 brand new guys there. It's a meet and greet type thing, and then there's that interaction on a day-to-day basis, because what happens at Acadiana is going to happen at Lafayette High. What happens at Carencro might happen in Northside. There's that interaction, just like our middle school. So, with Sheriff Garber having Judy's Middle School, Judy's feeds into Acadiana High. So my SRO works with his SRO from Acadiana to Judy. So, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of interaction on those type of things, and just going back to the personal part of the SROs, when Candy Kelly was the Scott Middle School principal, so she had direct contact like all of our administrators did. And I remember unfortunately we had a house fire, and she had direct contact with the fire chief and myself. And I get a group text in the middle of the night from her to the fire chief, myself, going, "Were one of my kids involved?" And we're like, "Yes, we'll be in touch with you soon." So Chief Sonia was able to give her the information. So guess what? When she showed up at school the next morning, she was able to deal with that tragedy for that family and for that child immediately. But going back to the kids, it's just the resource officers, it's a special network amongst themselves.
Okay, Mr. Angel.
So I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I actually heard more than I thought I'd hear. So first of all, we have no problem with communication among each other.
No.
We all agree. Anybody disagrees. The second thing is, it appears to me, based on what you just said, and I'm assuming it's for the rest of us, that there's even more communications, because it even transcends police department. It goes into the fire department.
Oh, definitely. Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's a wonderful, here again, y'all said it earlier, that there's a lot of working together and communicating with each other. I think it's even broader than that. I think that's great. I think it's great.
Chief Sturm.
Yes, if I may, I apologize. I don't know if it was said. I was in my room teaching a class yesterday, so I broke into this meeting. And if I repeat something, if this has been covered, please just stop me. But I just have a few comments. 1 week, and I don't know if this mic is working.
We can get you one.
Yeah, it is?
No.
They're working on it back there.
I would like to share a few thoughts. One, we do have tremendous multi-collaboration within our community, within all the public safety functions, as well as our private entities here. And that's in line with best practices, without question. I've been blessed to go and teach over the last 2 years throughout the country on a lot of these topics. I'm responsible for a Department of Public Safety with a 46-man police force, men and women, in a college environment, so much like a school. Just a few thoughts. One, I don't know if there's been any talk about a threat assessment team parish-wide, but I bring that to your attention. That's recognizing and preventing violent behavior and intervening on a pathway to violence in a very structured, multidisciplinary approach within the system. So it's done, it's effective. They don't make decisions, they make referrals, and then there's an accountability process. So I think that's the first component. The second component that I feel is very important, and you look at every case study when you dissect them and what we teach and what I was talking about today in West Monroe, and we didn't have any high school folks there. They were there in September, but I was in Palm County the week after Parkland, which is, I think, one county below Broward. We had some Broward folks there. And we had K through 12. Western Kentucky, 6 high school administrators. It boils down to your successful, well, when they dissect and things go wrong, it boils down to communications, span of control, and unity of command. So I just share that with you. Unity of command focuses on your answering to one supervisor, and you have effective span of control from a supervisor to subordinate ratio. And those are DHS, that's not Joe Eastern, that's Department of Homeland Security and FEMA doctrine. Then that span of control is anywhere, ideal is 5, but anywhere from 3 to 7, and then they've even expanded that to 10 for mobile field forces. Now, that's a lot of terminology, but it's applicable to anything that you do, any emergency response, because it's standardized at the federal, state, and local level, and you blend those in, and that's what we've been focusing on the last few years, in particular with this training, getting your non-governmental entities involved in that process, so that there's a common operating picture, a common language that's spoken, if that makes any sense. Those are just some of my thoughts. I agree completely with you. I look for a special officer that works in a campus community, that that is in tune, in line with those young men and women, understand that they're going to make mistakes. It's a nurturing environment, but at the same time, they will go to a threat and they will effectively deal with that threat. And that does take a very special person. There's no question about it.
Thank you, Chief. What I'm going to do now is, I think we're bordering on some of the specifics that I'd rather just keep within the room so we can speak more frankly without giving away too much. And so what I'm going to do now is call for a short recess. I'm going to ask, again, if you weren't here earlier, what I'm asking is for the public to leave the room. We're going to go into executive session when we come back. I can't do it in the conference room because it's too small, so we're going to have an executive session here. We're going to shut off the feeds to AOC. We're going to no principals, just police and cabinet and board. Police, cabinet, and board. And there won't, for those in the audience, it'll conclude the meeting after we finish the executive session.
It's time to stop, yeah.
Meeting adjourned.
It was supposed to, and this was the second to do so, but I think there were too many. Well, but you see, I'm gonna go to some of the things I might not be able to make it. So I might be bringing one or two.